In this section, we'll take a look at a pattern called template method. The template method is often used in the context of building frameworks or reusable code structures. What we'll do is we'll first take a look at template method in code. I'll show you the problem and I'll also introduce a solution for you. I'll draw it out for you and we'll have a little discussion around this whole refactoring, and then we'll abstract it and summarize the template method pattern. To show you the template method pattern, I've prepared a little example. It's a trivial example, but I'll go through it class by class. Let's start by explaining the main method. The main method I've split into two. The first part just creates an instance of a query. The query we'll see is an interface. The query people is an implementation of that interface. And then I have a little utility method that executes the query. If you look at that method, all it does is execute the query, gets back some result, and then I created a dummy method on the result that prints out whatever comes back from the query. And if I execute this program, all it does is print out the result. In this case, 4 people, John, Jim, Jill, and Steve. The output here isn't all that important, but we'll study the implementation. So the query is an interface, and it has one method execute that returns a result. I've created an implementation of that interface that I call query people. It has an algorithm, and it's this algorithm that is actually interesting. The algorithm starts by opening a connection. Again, I've created a dummy connection, so I'm not hooking up to a database in case you want to execute this. It should be a little easier for you. And then I execute that query upon that connection, and then I get back some result, and then finally I close the connection and return the result. Now let's assume we want to create another query that can be used from main. And this query would be on companies. Now, how different would that query be? It probably is so similar that the natural thing for a programmer to do is to do a copy and paste. So I'll copy the query people, create a new class that I will call query companies. The implementation should be very similar. So I'll open up the query companies and just change people to company. Test this out by creating a new instance of the query companies query, and then execute that query. If we now run the program, we now see that we're printing out both the people from the first query, and now in a different query, we're printing out the companies SciSpike, IBM, and Microsoft. So we have 2 implementations of query, and perhaps we expect hundreds of those. But let me put them side by side so we can compare them. The 2 algorithms are almost identical, apart from a little piece in the query string, where we have changed company to people. The template method pattern would allow us to extract the commonality in these 2 algorithms. What we will do is to introduce a new implementation, which I'm going to call abstract query, that implements the query interface. And I will try to implement as much of the algorithm as I can in the execute method of abstract query. I'll start by simply copying the algorithm from query people. Most of the algorithm would be common for all queries, but notice that I can't formulate the query string. In the template method, we solved this by declaring a method within the abstract base class that declares what we need the subclasses to do. I'm going to create a method here called getQueryString. Notice that the method is abstract and protected. This, of course, also means that we have to make the class abstract. Only thing I need to do now is to remove the query string from the abstract class and call the getQueryString on the subclasses. That effectively means that we're doing as much as we can in this abstract class, and then we delegate to the subclasses to formulate the query string. Now that we have introduced this abstract class with the algorithm that we want to apply, we need to go back to the concrete queries and refactor them. The first thing to do is to make sure that instead of implementing the query, that they extend the abstract query. I'll let Eclipse generate the getQueryString method, and then I can copy the query string from the execute method into the getQueryString method. Finally, we can delete the execute method that we no longer need. And we should do the same change to the query companies class also. And by doing this, we've removed the duplication of algorithm between the query companies and query people. The special versions of each query now only have the production of the query string. Everything else has been lifted up to the base class so that the algorithm is the same for any query that we might introduce in future. Of course, in our example, the algorithm was quite trivial, but you can imagine there could be all kinds of new things that happen in the framework. Maybe we need to throw some exceptions or catch some exception. Maybe we need to deal with connection pools and so on. And what we effectively done is we put all that policy of how to execute queries in one place, rather than having it spread out across all the concrete queries. And if we execute it, we will see exactly the same result, which was expected. All we've really done is refactor it and made the code a lot cleaner and made it a lot easier for developers to introduce new queries.